welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read and tried to read in the month of October. It was a lot. I have notes. They are in chicken scratch in my notebook. Oh, by the way, isn't my notebook cute? My partner got this for me like 2 years ago, and I'm finally using it. Anyway, so hopefully with notes to go faster. Usually when I film my wrap-ups, I've got like 2 hours of footage and it's insane. So when this video goes up, I should have, if you hear banging, there is construction. There will always be construction. This video is scheduled to go up after my Indigathon video, which is the last one, where I go through my TBR for Indigathon 2020, and then I also do the Indigathon tag questions. So please go check that out. In that video, I also mentioned that there is an Indigenous COVID response website where you can donate funds, you can donate supplies, and other ways learn about the challenges and needs of Indigenous communities during the pandemic, because it's not over. So last month in October, I tried to read 13 books. I DNF'd 2. One of them I owned, and 2 of them were rereads. So let's get started. The book titles and the author names will be listed in the description below. I didn't write down author names in my notes. It's okay. So the first book I read was Shorefall. This is the sequel to Foundryside, which I think my very first video, I talk about how much I just enjoyed that book and how much of a good time it was. So that video will be in the cards. Is that here? Is that here? I don't know. Okay. So Shorefall picks up several months after the end of Foundryside. Sanchia and her friends are continuing their work making scribing tech more accessible to all the people of Tavan. One of their previous enemies is attempting to resurrect a Hierophant, a godlike powerful figure from the past. Man, my notes started off much different than they ended in terms of what I included. So I love this series. I thought it did a really good job reintroducing us to the magic. So briefly, the magic system, you inscribe sigils onto objects to basically use computer coding logic to convince them to behave in ways that counter normal laws of physics. The prime example is you convince a wheel it's rolling downhill in order to make it roll of its own accord. So I thought the book did a really good job of reintroducing us to all of the rules. There's a lot of rules, so you kind of need to know where all the rules are to find the loopholes that they find to subvert the power of the people that they are fighting. Like, it's a little bit info dumpy in like explaining an example, but I feel like the examples are very relevant to the events that are currently happening or the goals that they are working on. So I thought that reintroducing us to the world was very seamless. The conflict at play is there's a lot of discussion about humanity is very flawed. Humanity is violent and selfish and greedy and misguided, and if you could remove that, should you? You know, if you have the power to make the world better, should you? You know, there's this question of like, does the capacity for good in human beings outweigh the capacity for bad? And I think one of the compelling arguments and the compelling themes in the book is the way in which human beings are stronger together, both like symbolically and actually. It's a big thing in the book, where if you can like literally combine people's strengths, what is possible. And I feel like we are in a time where that's, with everything that's going on in the world, like as scary as things are, I am constantly seeing people fundraising for certain organizations, doing like mutual aid one-on-one. I'm seeing people like in my Buy Nothing group, like innumerable amounts of people like saying, hey, are you homebound? Can I drop off your ballot for you? It feels overwhelming to enact change, but this book was just like a small little fictional reminder of the way that when we do really need each other, we come out of the woodworks and we are stronger when we work together and we work to better each other's lives. So it was a joy. I loved it. I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do in the third book. Because the world is like very much in shambles at the end of it. So I'm curious to see what they're gonna do next. Okay. The next book I read was another favorite of the month. This is Lobizona. This is the first book in the Wolves of No World series. So Manu, short for Manuela, is an undocumented Argentine immigrant living with her mother in Miami, Florida. After her mother is taken by ICE, Manu investigates mysterious clues about her past and discovers a magical world where Argentine folklore comes to life. In a lineage where men are werewolves and women are witches, they are lobizons and brujas, Manu is a lobizona. So now that she's finally in a place where like she belongs, like she's discovered this magic in her and she's discovered this whole world and this heritage that belongs to her that was denied to her, even in this place, her existence is still illegal. And it is a huge conversation throughout the book, like the concept of like what it means to be an undocumented person and what that means for your safety and your options and your identity. Like she either has to like be herself and risk unwanted attention, or she has to hide herself and make herself less in order to be safe. So there's a lot of great conversations about gender roles and assumptions, and there's an explicit line in the book talking about Manu being a lobizona, and it's saying that like the powers of this world are not about gender, they're about worldview. So this book is very explicit that the roles that have been traditionally assigned to gender are roles, are things that are created and are not actually determined by your biology. So if you are looking to fill a Harry Potter shaped hole in your life, this is an amazing story with a girl with a difficult upbringing, discovering her secret magical heritage. She attends a magical school, there's a magical sport, and there are forces within the school that threaten her safety and her future. So this is also another book that definitely, like Shorefall, there is also another theme of the way that people are stronger when they work together. Anyway, this was so much fun. The cover is so beautiful. I'm so looking forward to where the series is going. Of course, it ends kind of like on a big cliffhanger where it's like, okay, and now we're off to do this giant, overwhelming task. One of the things that really intrigued me about this book was I don't think I've ever seen a non-translated book that features a character of Argentine descent or features Argentine folklore. And I have like even though like my heritage is Mexican, I studied abroad in Argentina, so I have a little bit of like nostalgia, joy for whenever I do get to see representations from that country. So that was cool. It's a lot of fun. Okay, so next I finished the audiobook of Minor Feelings, An Asian American Reckoning. So let's see, this was narrated by the author, Kathy Park Hong. She is a Korean American poet and essayist, and in this book she uses personal story and history to look at Asian racial identity in America. I've been really pushing myself to read more nonfiction this year, and I think like my favorite nonfiction is genre is going to be memoir, especially memoir that combines like history and social commentary. So, and this book was like, while a lot of it is a memoir, there's a lot of it that's not. There are a few key historical events that the author examines. You know, sometimes she'll kind of talk about like her own experience and reading about them in the news, or her own discovery in researching them, and then she'll kind of like tie it back into, you know, her own feelings of wrestling with Asian identity and expectations and traumas, and the ways in which they experience racism, and the ways in which they are also complicit in racism in America. Okay, I should read the rest of my notes before I go too far into it. So from my perspective, Asian experience in America, and Asian is a very broad term, but it's like often left out of the discussion about race and racism. So, but this book does examine the ways in which like the model minority portrayal, it's as much an acknowledgement of how the Asian demographic is an exception to a lot of the assumptions and trends of other racial groups in this country. So it's as much the exception as it is a stereotype we put on them to silence them. And to silence and invalidate all the racism and sacrifice that they have experienced and they internalize within their own communities. So this book is not like a complete history. It's not a guide to future action, but it is, it's a powerful experience to read, and and there's a lot about it that like defies it is a defiance of the experience of being silenced, and it definitely challenges a lot of assumptions that, you know, that I went going into it. I know that like the book opens with the author talking about her experience with depression, and she definitely had like kind of like a very like ugly kind of depression, not like a very like functional depression. And I had a moment where I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. Girl, why weren't you expecting that? There was an element of like that model minority myth where it's like there is something put together and functional and I don't know, that runs counter to the imagery of like really messy deep depression. So immediately I had some of my expectations checked. So good. There's also, with the author being a poet, there's a really interesting analysis on language. She explains as part of her draw to poetry is the way that poetry plays with language in a way that non-native English speakers can bring something interesting, because there's a lot. So there's a lot about poetry that really plays with language and plays with the language that you assume, or like your own interpretations of it. Anyway, I think in editing I'll be able to make that coherent. It was great. I highly recommend it. The next book I picked up was The Bear and the Nightingale, and this was a DNF. So the story follows Vasilia in her rural Russian aristocrat. I don't think aristocrat is the right word. But it's like her family is definitely landowners. Like her family has people who work under them, who work the land. So this follows Vasilia in her rural family life that are filled with tales and traditions of Russian folklore and fairy tales. This is a very like gloomy, cold winter night style of fairy tale, very dark. So I DNF this because it just wasn't what I was in the mood for. Like, there was nothing wrong with the writing. I thought that it wove the fairy tales into the actual events of the story very well. But I feel like the fairy tale influence was just like a little bit too on the nose for what I wanted. like maybe the build-up was a little bit too slow for me. I've heard quite a few people say that they really like this series. It's got a lot of positive reviews. I would like to try and read it again, but it was a stressful month. You know, all this time leading up to the election. And I was just like, yo, I'm not excited to pick this back up. Yep. So the next book I picked up was Storm of Locusts by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is the sequel to Trail of Lightning, which I read last month before. I will have a little card with whatever video I talk about it. So this book is set like a month after the events of Trail of Lightning. The Goodacre twins arrive to tell Maggie Hosky that their youngest brother Caleb and Maggie's friend Kai have been taken, perhaps by a new mysterious cult. The cult is led by a figure called the White Locust, and true to name and Navajo legend, seems to have mythical powers at their disposal that have to do with locusts, flying, swarms. Let's see. So to rescue these two people, the team must travel outside of the walls of Dineta and through the horrors of the post-apocalyptic landscape to rescue their family. Yeah, when I picked this up, I probably read this in like 2, maybe 3 days. Like, it's an action-packed series. I really, it's fast-paced. I think it does a good job of like portraying the challenges and horrors of their post-apocalyptic world without dwelling on them too much. And you know, not necessarily, but like, here's what it does. You never feel that the protagonists are truly helpless. There was a moment, and a little bit of a spoiler, where you think that the protagonists that we're following, these two women in this scene, you think that you're like, oh my god, are they going to be sexually assaulted? Are they going to be murdered? Like, it seems like a really bad situation, but I feel like the potential horrors are acknowledged, but I was familiar enough with like the tone and the style of the book that I knew that they were going to get out of it. It might come at a heavy price. The tension might last for a while, but I always felt that our protagonist had at least one more trick up their sleeve. So that's good to know. That's a good feeling, I think, when you're talking about apocalyptic hellscapes. There's an interesting element talking about cults and like the lore of occult ideas and the way that like people get drawn in by these big ideas that seem to fit what they want the world to be. Actually, I'm thinking about it now. There is kind of a tie-in back to Foundry side of like, if you have the power to change the world into what you think your ideal version of the world is, do you actually have the authority to do that by yourself? Like, to make that decision without taking into account all of the people that are going to be affected by it. You know, I thought the like tension around Maggie and Kai's relationship, because at the end of Trail of Lightning and the beginning of this book, you're like, are they good? Are they gonna be okay? You don't really know. You don't really know what, you know Maggie's side of it, but since we don't run into Kai until much later in the book, there is like this tension of like, are they gonna be okay? And I thought that like that was like a well-developed point of tension. I am excited to read the next books in the series. I'm excited to read other works by Rebecca Roanhorse. Everyone right now has been talking about Black Sun, which is her recent release. So, yeah. So the next book I read, this was the audiobook of Sawkill Girls. This had fantastic audiobook narration. This might be like the first horror book I've ever read. And granted, it was like a YA horror, but like I cannot do horror in video games. I can do horror when it's suspense, creepy situations. I don't like gross. I don't like a little bit of violence, okay, but like I was talking with a friend of mine. He's like, so you're saying that like the Saw movies would be like your worst thing? I'm like, they just wouldn't be fun. And like my takeaway from people who love horror is they find something fun about it. So anyway, this one I liked. This one, the narration was great. The narrator had so each of the chapters follows 3 different characters. So they're all teenage girls, but the narrator and I think the author too did a great job of having a distinct tone. I've definitely found sometimes when I listen to audiobooks, I forget like whose perspective I'm following. But in this one, like I could just listen to like the word choice and like what the person in the moment was talking about, and I could identify which character we were following. It was very clear. So, what's this book about? So on the small island of Sawkill, girls are going missing. One here and there over the decades, but as the mysterious disappearances start to accelerate, 3 girls will be called to defeat or serve a dark power that has been lurking on Sawkill. So this was like a great like girl power book. This had a great like suspense buildup of like what's going on. There's a huge paranormal element of it, but in the beginning, like you definitely sense, yes, there is like this dark power. The island of Sawkill itself is also like its own power, and that you kind of come to realize that very slowly. So that's very cool. Each of the girls featured in the story bring like their own strengths and challenges to the story. There's definitely a theme of like the way that men perpetrate violence on women and the way that men will like pit women against each other, or like the way that there's a thing later with like a secret society in the book that maybe because this was a YA novel, I felt was like a little bit too on the nose of like men using women as pawns are bad. And like, yeah, I know, like that theme has kind of already been established. Like, did we also need that? I think I learned about the audiobook narration being good. I think I learned about that from Noelle Gallagher. I think this was another book I took from her like favorite audiobooks of all time video. So I will also link that down below if you would like to check that out. So the next book I read was Cosmos by Carl Sagan. This is the only book I read that I owned a physical copy of. This month was insane for my library books coming available. Cosmos by Carl Sagan. So this is based on the TV show. When was this published? Stand by. So this was published in 1980. So clearly there's been more advancements in science and astrophysics since then. But this one is building on the knowledge that I gleaned from The Universe by Isaac Asimov. All right, so over the course of 13 chapters, Sagan explores 15 billion years of the development of the universe, civilization, and science. The language in the writing language can be very like flowery and full of analogy, and the narrative can kind of wander. It will like connect 2 very distant points of discussion. That didn't really suit me. Like the narrative styles made it really easy for me to get distracted. I've never watched the TV show, so I feel like that kind of flowery narrativeness might have suited the TV show better. And I'm curious like how closely related the content is. So it did make me curious about the show. I had a post on Instagram where I took like one of my favorite quotes from the book. And this is kind of edited, so it's not like 8 sentences, it's like 4. But I'm gonna read it to you. But I do know this. There is no record in the entire history of the Library of Alexandria that any of its illustrious scientists and scholars ever seriously challenged the political, economic, and religious assumptions of their society. The permanence of stars was questioned. The justice of slavery was not. Science and learning in general were the preserve of a privileged few. Science never captured the imagination of the multitude. When at long last the mob came to burn the library down, there was nobody to stop them. Which seems like a really dour analysis, but the takeaway I took from it was this little blurb of every time you make the effort to learn something new, you fight back the darkness a little bit, and you don't do it alone. So again, this was definitely embracing a lot of like election anxiety, and I just noticed like how much the light is fading because I live in the Pacific Northwest and it gets dark at 4:30. So we're just gonna have to thrive in artificial light here. Anyway, I think after I read this book, that is when I started changing the ending of my videos to say like I encourage you to go out into the world and be curious, because you know, not only are you like fighting misinformation and, you know, educating, you know, exercising the muscle of your brain to learn new information is good for you. It also like brings people together when you like get really excited about something and then find other people who are also really excited about it. So there's something very bonding about that. And, I will talk about this more when I do my next month's wrap up and I talk about the new Jim Crow, but like I had this experience of like as overwhelming and disheartening a lot of the information in that book was, I am at a point where I have enough information that I now have a sense of like what to do next. And so that's, you know, that's my little bit of like go out into the world and be curious, because even if like you're struggling to unlearn biases, or you're struggling to unlearn a very edited history that you have been taught, I promise you that at some point you will start being able to put the pieces together and you will have a sense of, well, now what? What do I do now? And I think the more you learn and the more you connect with people who've already been doing this work, the less overwhelming and less lonely it feels. So anyway, Cosmos, I did enjoy it. I liked it. But I think narrative-wise, I liked the universe a little bit better. But I enjoyed it. And then whenever I get to it, the next book I will be reading in my little sky science, is that really the word I want to use? Astronomy, astrophysics trend. I picked up Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson. So stay tuned for that. Okay, what did I read next? We're halfway through it, people. All right. The next book I read was The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. This face is because I loved it so much. There were points where I'm reading it and I realized I just had like the largest smile on my face. This was... Okay, let's get into it. Okay. So this is a lighthearted, diverse, chaotic space opera that follows the crew of the Wayfarer, a small ship that is capable of boring tunnels through space-time for FTL travel. So while this book does have like some moments where it talks about heavy subjects, you know, it talks about, you know, genocide, it talks about war crimes, it talks, you know, it handles these scenes with a lot of like grace and curiosity, and it made like the story like very digestible. It uses the other alien species as such an effective method of critical analysis of the norms and faults of human society. We have representations of polyamory, chronic illness, neurodivergence, physical disability, just to name a few. It avoids the pitfalls of like equating those kind of topics with otherism. Like I feel like, especially like early fantasy, early horror, and a lot of like sci-fi that deals with aliens, like the aliens will be like a stand-in for this thing that is other, but I feel like this book really, it avoids equating the two. because there is a constant narrative reminder to not judge other species by your own social norms. So this is the first in a series. I'm really looking forward to continuing it. I describe this one as like, it's definitely like a palate cleanser series in the way that, like, I don't know, you read like a really heavy, good but heavy book, and I don't know, you read a romance to kind of like lighten the mood. I feel like this kind of fits that same purpose without being like a romance genre, but it's like, it's easily digestible, it's a fun time, there's action, and it's also like, it's definitely more lighthearted than Storm of Locusts was, but it does have that same thing of like, you know, the protagonists are gonna be okay. You know, there might be some cost, you're not quite sure how they're gonna get there, but at the end of the day, you're sure they're gonna be okay. If you see a sudden shadow here, it's because my laptop went dark. So, okay. Cool. What's next? Okay. The next book I read was the audiobook of Lirael. This is a reread of a book that I own a physical copy of. And this audiobook series is narrated by Tim Curry. It's excellent. So this book starts about 14 years after the end of Sabriel. It follows Lirael, the daughter of the Clare. The Clare are the woman seers who live in the glacier in the far north of the Old Kingdom. Later on, we also start to follow Prince Samith, who is the son of Sabriel and King Touchstone. So Lirael is really the focus of the book, and her initial conflict is that she has not yet developed the sight with a capital S, which is the unifying ability of all the Clare to see potential futures. But she's a powerful charter mage, and she puts those talents to good use in the Clare's library, where she encounters a magical dog, and they encounter a bunch of magical adventures. If you like magical libraries, I think they're really only in the library for like a third of the book, but it's great. It's great. So with exploring with her magical dog, she eventually discovers a greater destiny that she has that has been seen for her. Fighting an evil that not only threatens the Old Kingdom, but all of the human world. This builds very well on the world and the magic system set up in Sabriel. It might be my favorite in the series because I really love the magical library. I also really love the character of the disreputable dog. I love the character of Mogget in Sabriel, and now we have the disreputable dog, who's a very different character, but also like a perfect complement to Mogget when they finally meet up. Great. I love the series. So then I'll go into saying the next audiobook I finished was Abhorsen, which is the third book in that series. So it's the Abhorsen trilogy, which is Sabriel, Lirael, Abhorsen. So this concludes the conflict set up in Lirael. We discover the truth of Lirael's parentage and the true responsibilities of Samith. He has grown up thinking that he is the next Abhorsen in waiting. Spoiler alert, the world has different plans for him. But it's I feel like that's pretty obvious in Lirael. You get the hint of like, he's supposed to be the Abhorsen in waiting, but like, is he though? Also, we get to see all of the gates of the River of Death, and I love fantastical depictions of the underworld, of the land of the dead, and I think the one in this series is really clever, and we finally get to see all the way to the ninth gate. So next I read This Is How You Lose the Time War. This is a book I've been wanting to read for a while. So this follows two female agents on opposing sides of a grand war fought throughout time. They communicate through fantastical letters, and their rivalry eventually develops into a risky romance because they're on opposing sides. I wanted to love this book, but I just liked it, and like as soon as I put it down, I kind of forgot about it. The book is really about the writing. It's very short. It has very like poetic, lyrical writing. There's a lot of interesting, beautiful imagery. But like I was really interested like in the Time War and like the two opposing agencies, and I wanted to know more about it. or I wanted to know more about the development of the relationship of our two characters. They are known as Red and Blue. And I felt like the transition from like flirty rivalry to romance was pretty sudden. Like there was like a bit of a buildup, but I feel like over the course of one letter, it was like, oh, we're not just rivals, we're also like in love with each other. So I kind of would have liked a little more development in that, and maybe like if it had been longer, there would have been more room for it. So I felt like the parts that I found the most interesting just weren't what was at the focus of it. I've heard some people say that they had trouble with like the time travel description. I thought the time travel description was clever. Time travel. My brain tends to get it. But they describe it as like moving up thread and down thread, which like for a moment was like, wait, up and down, not forward and backwards? What? But then I thought about it as like, oh, it's like a tapestry. You move up thread, the oldest tightly woven stuff, down thread, the loose threads of unwoven possibility. Got it. Okay. Yeah, so like I liked it, but I felt kind of meh about it. And I feel like the people who I've seen review it, who really love it, really liked the writing. Like that was what really hooked into them. I heard someone mention like also reading out an audiobook. Maybe I would enjoy listening to it. I'm glad I read it, but so the next book I picked up was an audiobook of The Wilder Girls, and I DNF'd this after like 30 minutes. This is about a mysterious illness that has taken over the Raxter School for girls, and they've been quarantined for 18 months. There was like too much like immediate body horror, like talking, because like this disease, it causes like deformations and like a lot of like painful, scary things to happen to their bodies. And there was just like a lot of descriptions of like deformities and like, you know, bloody pus and like having to like stitch up your eyelid, and it was not a good time for me. I was like, oh, I'm not having a good time. Nope. Okay. I tried it. I don't know. I might like look up some more reviews and see if, I don't know, maybe like reading it physically would be better than listening to it. But I definitely learned that like at least like with whatever body horror that's when I figured out I need more suspense. I need a lot more build up. If there's gonna be something like about injury or something gross, like I need more build up. I need to be more invested in the story in order to deal with those things. So I mean, I tried a new thing, didn't pan out. Are we actually going to be able to do this in just 2 segments of video before my memory runs out? I spoke too soon about doing it in 2 takes because my partner just came home. Okay, but I've just got 1 book left, so it's fine. All right, so the last book I read was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. All right, so this book is about the reclusive Hollywood star Evelyn Hugo has finally decided to give a tell-all interview, but she has chosen a very specific, relatively unknown journalist to speak to. We learn about her rise through the ranks of Hollywood elite and learn the circumstances around her infamous 7 marriages. I loved it. Like I said, hard crying at the end. The twist at the end was interesting. Evelyn is I've heard some people be like, oh my god, she's such an icon. I'm like, yeah. I like this character a lot. She is determined, she is ruthless, she is focused, she is passionate, she is talented. And I found like the thing that I really liked about this character is she is unlikable in a way that I feel like women are not allowed to be. Like likable is something that is necessary for a woman. Like it's always in question whether or not she's likable, whether she's relatable. And men with enough money and power, they don't fucking worry about that shit. Like do you think that like Jeff Bezos worries about whether or not people like him? Do you think like Harvey Weinstein, fuck him, at his height, worried about whether or not people liked him? Like I do not mean to like equate Evelyn Hugo with them, but I'm saying that like there is like the ways in which her character are flawed challenges the way the expectations we have about women being likable, about women not being the ones who instigate hurt. This is a great complex story. If you're like a fan of, if you've seen like the movie Hail Caesar, if you're a fan of the golden age of Hollywood, Evelyn Hugo is like distinctly bisexual. She like comes out and uses that word and is like, do not erase that identity from me. So we fucking love that. We fucking love some bi rep in our books. One of my favorite moments was a conversation about marriage and divorce, because the journalist is also in the midst of going through a divorce. This isn't really a spoiler, but it's like there's the conversation of like, sometimes divorce is because like these two people, they don't love each other in that way anymore. It's not working. It's not good. So where does this like shame come from? And it's the idea of like, anyway, it was an interesting analysis of the distinction of the grief of like losing your partner is distinct from the grief of feeling like a failure in your marriage, and like you can have one without the other. So it was an interesting analysis of like, you know, not just like the connection of a relationship between two people, but also like the institution of marriage and the expectations we place on this symbolic agreement and the ways in which that is separate from the actual relationship of the two people. A very well written book. Next month I will be talking about the other book written by this author, which is Daisy Jones and the Six, which I listened to an audiobook and that was excellent also. So I'll talk about that whenever my next month's wrap-up goes up. Let me finish this up so my partner can not be exiled to the bedroom anymore. I hope you have a good rest of your day. I encourage you to go out into the world and be curious. I will have lots of things in my description box, my information about Indigathon, the links to the 2 videos from the creators, Brody and Michelle, a link to the COVID Indigenous fundraiser website that I mentioned, a couple other resources, my social media if you would like to follow me in other places. Okay, before my video quality gets too crappy because it's too dark in here. Talk to you in my next video. Bye!